All right, good evening, everyone. Tonight we are Zochem Meretz Hashem to begin Simin Kuf Yud Ches, chapter 118 in the Kitzur, which are the halachos concerning preparation for the Seder. So the Kitzur writes as follows. This is 118 Aleph, Kuf Yud Ches, Siv Aleph. Yehader achar yain yafa lemitzas abrakosos. One should try to have nice wine for the 4 cups. V'myesh benimtza yain adam yafa kimo alavan. V'gam hu kosher kimo alavan mitzvah bo yosim alavan. And if you could find red wine that is just as good as the white wine, ideally red wine should be used. Why? Shene'emar al tere yayin ki yis adam. Mashma shechashivuso shayan hu kishu adam. Really, based on the pasuk identifies when it speaks about the red. When it speaks about wine, Shalom Melech says that wine is red. In other words, he identifies, do not set your sight upon wine that is red. Meaning Shalom Melech is saying, don't overindulge in wine. But the idea over here is that you see that Shlomo Melech says that like the paradigmatic image or model of wine is red wine. Mashma shechashivuso shel yain kishu adam. Ideally, the most chashuv type of wine is red wine. Va'od lefi sheyesh bo zecher ledam shaya paro shochet yaldei b'nei Yisrael. Furthermore, this is actually interesting. The wine is reminiscent of blood, specifically the blood of the Jewish children, which was spilled by Paro. That's interesting. The Kitzur says, but in places, there were blood libels. He says, so we abstain from taking red wine on Pesach. It's amazing how we see how anti-Semitism even shapes halacha. So even although the ideal is red wine, if a person lives in a place, there's a concern of blood libels, avoid the red wine, and use white. So again, now we're switching gears a little bit. So again, remember, for karpas, we dip a vegetable into salt water. So the Kitzur says that for the tibul rishon, it calls the first dipping, because he's referring, let's say, to maror. Maror is the second dipping, but for the first act of dipping, which is what we call karpas, so noagin harbe likach parsley. The tov yoser likach tzelar. Others say it's better to use celery. Sheyesh lo tam tov shuhu chai, which has a good taste when it's raw. V'hamufchar hu lakachas tznon. But the idea ultimately, again, is to go ahead and take a radish. Okay? Now the Mishnah Berurah comments, the Mishnah Berurah says the truth is, it doesn't really matter. You could use whatever you want. The ikar is that one has to go ahead and use a vegetable that has the bracha of ha'adama, that is not what you're using for maror. That's really the ikar over here, because the idea over here is that we want to use something different for karpas than we want to go ahead and use for maror. It's a fascinating idea. Now again, the Kitzur in the next halacha goes into the halachos of maror. So again, at least to highlight the halacha, says tzorach maror noagin likach tamcha. So when it comes to maror, some take tamcha. Now tamcha is horseradish. Now of course this is not like processed horseradish that you use like on your gefilte fish, but rather again this is actually like horseradish root, ground up horseradish root. Vechevan shu charif ma'od yicholen lefaro b'raizban. So now since it is very sharp, you could go ahead and grate it. But you have to be careful that it doesn't lose its complete bitterness. This actually is an important halacha for this year, because this year when the Seder is on Motzei Shabbos, so the halacha is one could grate their maror on Erev Shabbos if one uses horseradish, but one should make sure that it's covered so that the bitterness does not go ahead and dissipate. And that's why the Kitzur says over here, this is an important halacha. He says, on a normal year, you would grate your maror when you come home from shul, because this way you can grate it and you're ready to use it immediately. The issue is over here that b'Shabbos asur lefaro. Now on Shabbos, you're not allowed to go ahead and grate it. You're not allowed to go ahead and grate it on Shabbos, because again, remember, grating, right? Grinding something is the malacha of tochen. So what you can do is, so in other words, one could grate, as we just mentioned before, one could grate the horseradish before Shabbos begins and then cover it. But the Kitzur says, this is a better idea. The nikra maror. So again, the Kitzur therefore says that halacha l'maisa, just take lettuce. One could go ahead and use lettuce. Now, it's interesting to note that halacha l'maisa, again, what type of lettuce is permissible? So generally, the assumption is that it's romaine lettuce. The truth is, iceberg lettuce is permissible as well. And according to some poskim, iceberg lettuce is even preferable because romaine lettuce has a significant bug problem. So of course, if you purchase bodek lettuce, that's great. But iceberg lettuce, if you're checking it itself, is a little bit easier. Now, interestingly enough, why would lettuce be called maror? After all, I understand horseradish fresh, it's bitter. But why would lettuce be called marar? V'nikra marar lefi shekisheshoha bekarka nasa kalachmar. So this is interesting because halacha l'maisa, if you leave lettuce in the ground long enough, its stalk becomes bitter. Okay, interesting. So the Kitzur goes on and gives some other examples of marar. He says, Kol aminim sheyotzin bahen mitztarfin ze im ze lekizayis. So this is very interesting. The one thing the Kitzur does say is you could also go ahead and mix and match marar. Right? In other words, so you could take a little bit of horseradish or a little bit of lettuce, mix it together, as long as you end up with the complete shear of marar, ultimately, again, you're good to go. It doesn't have to be one type of species. The kids also skip a little bit. He says, Ha'olam ein yotzin bahem ella im kein heim lachim, aval ha'klachim yotzin bahem bein lachim bein yeveshim achlo muvushalan o kavushan. This is important. If you're going to use leaves, like leaves of lettuce, the leaves themselves have to be fresh. They can't be dried up. But if you're going to use stalks, then ultimately, again, whether they're dry or whether they're fresh doesn't really matter. However, again, they can't be cooked, nor can they be pickled. Okay, well, so stop over here for today. Shkayach, everyone. Wishing everyone a wonderful day. Such a schus to begin our preparation for the Seder.